before I start with your presentation, I would like to say good afternoon to everyone and welcome to session 1, which is room number 1. I'm Dancy Gawin from University Malaysia Sarawak. So in this session, our presentation will be focused on the raptor ecology and behavior. If you are interested to know about environmental changes and threats to raptors, you can enter to room number 2. For this sessions, there will be 10 presenters and a bit housekeeping. So every presenter, you are given 20 minutes to present your findings. And for the audiences, if you have questions that you want to give to the presenter, you can use the chat box. Okay. And if that's time for you, within that 20 minutes after the presenter presents their findings, then I will bring up 1 or 2 questions. If not, we carry it out till the end of the sessions. And all right, so without further ado, I would like to invite our first presenter, Dr. Joe Susai. So he's going to present a topic on habitat use of roosting site and movement patterns of Australasian Grass-Owl. I give to you, Dr. Sai.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Gawin. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to present our studies on behalf of our research group team from National Jai University and the Taiwan Wildlife Conservation Group. And I also want to acknowledge the funding agency, the Forestry Bureau, for supporting this project. So a little bit background about Australasian grass-owl. This is widely distributed from Indian continent, Southeast Asia to East Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, and all the way to Australia. And globally, it is least concerned, although we don't really have a lot of data about this species. But in Taiwan, it is considered as a first-class endangered species. And for this species, we have, for the owl species, we have about 13 species owl, but there is only 1 resident owl in the non-forest habitat. And previously, the population has been estimated about 300 to 500 individuals, which is not a lot. And most of the problems or the threat comes from the habitat they use. They generally use the early successional habitat, such as like grassland, scrubland, or like riverbed, airport, or some farmland for feedings. And it is highly overlapped with human activities. And they breed in winter from like September up till March or April next year. So it's basically the dry season in the southern part of Taiwan. So talking about the threat, since it's highly overlapped with the human population, so the first threat will be the habitat loss and the degradation. And a lot of the development and Taiwan is a highly populated country, so it is inevitable. And the third is the ones I'm showing here. There's a grass-owl with a net, which is unintentionally for the owls. It's mainly for other birds or pest control. So like also like in the airport, we have the similar situation to prevent the bird strike. The third point is about secondary poisoning, since they mainly eat rodents. So they face a lot of problems with the secondary poisoning. And the last point is that around 10 years, before 10 years ago, we don't really have a lot of information or studies about this elusive owls. And there's not a lot of public awareness as well. But all those things has been improved in the past 5 to 10 years with the support from the government and the multiple non-governmental organizations and the school, universities. So our study objectives, we want to use the satellite telemetries to study from the more individual perspective to know their habitat use. So for this particular presentation, we want to show you the roosting site, how they use the roosting site, what's the pattern, and what's the habitat type. And they are not staying in one spot. They actually move around. So how's their movement patterns, especially in relation to seasons, sex, and ages. So we started from January 2018, and we totally trapped 21 individuals in southern Taiwan. It's actually, most of them are from the airport mistnet. As I mentioned before, that is for preventing the bird strike. So that's a good strategy to rescue them and use those as a way to understand their behavior and the distribution. So among those 1 individuals, there are 6 adults and 15 subadults. And in adults, we have more male samples, and subadults, we have more female samples. And then we'll talk about that later. So we use 2 brands of satellite telemetry techniques. One is low-tech. This is a pinpoint model, which is a GPS and Argos models. The other one is ecotone, is a solar-based and with GPS and GSM transmission. So the key thing here is that we know that the satellite telemetry has been used in many raptor species. And for most diurnal species, that seems to work out very well, especially for the solar part. But since Grass-Owl is a nocturnal species, so when it should be charging, they are sleeping in the grassland. So we are worried about the charging capacities. So we tried both at the beginning, but later on we realized that it's not charging very well. So later stage, we use more battery type from the Pinpoint 355. And here I just show you some basic information about all these individuals. And you can see that some individuals are tracked for quite some time and some are really short. So I'll focusing on 17 individuals that has been tracked for more than 1 month for the rest of the analysis here. So when we found that based on those location data, we go there and then check on what kind of habitat they're actually using. And all of them are early successional habitat, such as grassland, and a lot of them are in military base or some abandoned agricultural land. And dominant grass species are Congo grass or Bermuda grass or buffalo grass. And the later 2 are very common, introduced species worldwide. But you can see that all these are about 90 to maybe 110 meter high, and then they're pretty dense. So it's a very good habitat for them to prevent some mammalian predator like feral dogs. And here I want to show some information about roosting site usage. And if you look at the x-axis, I divided them into numbers of consecutive days that they stay in one spot. And for the same color, that will represent the same individual. As you can see that some of them use the roosting site repeatedly. Like some of them can use one site, like within 3 to 5 meters for over 20 to 30 days. But 68% of them of the roosting site were only used once. So that means some are moving regularly and some are staying in one spot. And the next thing we want to know is why they move, when they move, and what's the reason behind those movement patterns. And let's see some information from different genders. Again, those are the x-axis are the distance that they move from one roosting spot to another roosting spot. So some of them may move just for 10 meters day after yesterday, and some of them may move up to 2 or 10 or more than 10 kilometers. But you can see that 92% overall, the movement are within 2 kilometers. So they do move, but not for really long distance. And different genders have some different patterns. Like, for example, within 10 meters, like males tend to be more sedentary, 55% of them, versus females, only 27% are the movement are within 10 meters. But for a relatively long distance move, like 10 to 2,000 meters, females have the higher percentage than the males. And one thing to notice that you can see that for the female, there are some percentage that have the movement longer than 10 kilometers, but we didn't see anything from the male part. So as far as the distribution, you can see for females, they are pretty universe from 0 to 10 meter, 10 to 100, or up to 2 kilometers, and then dropped from the longer distance. But for the males, a lot of them tend to be sedentary, and then the percentage after 100 meters up to 2 kilometers are much less. So this is the pattern between genders, and we can see that these patterns pretty much hold for the breeding and non-breeding season. And here we show you the movement patterns from those roosting sites. That because I forgot to mention that because we want to save the batteries, so most of the tags we only scheduled one daytime point, that's the roosting time, for every day. So we're using those data to show you the result here. So here is the movement pattern, and you can see that one polygon means the territory or the range map for one individual. You can see that it varies by individuals, but some of them overlap quite a bit. And if I want to show you more detail, I'll use a different approach. So the x-axis is the time, and the y-axis is the daily moving distance. So if you see a spike, that normally means that they move long distance from the previous night. But since when they are released, they are not released from move around, trying to find their new home. So we can see some post-release movement like that. But normally after 3 to 4 weeks, they will settle down to find their places. And we can see that there are some big spike time to 4 meters. In the beginning, we don't really know what's the reason. So we try to look at to match on their breeding cycles. So their breeding seasons are from September to April. So you can see that most of the movement seems to be within the breeding season, and most of them are at the early stage. So I'll use another ways to show you how we try to discover what they are doing individually. So here, the x-axis will be the same, and the y-axis, I changed that to the accumulated move distance. So if you see that they are a flat line, that means they are not moving. But if you see a big spike, that means they move far from the previous roosting site. So at the very beginning, what we see, especially like in the first year, that you can see that at the early breeding season, they have that kind of long distance movement. At the first year, we didn't know what's going on because they do that, but they will go back to some other roosting site and then stay there, but still have some movement. So we don't know what's going on. But from the second and third year, we realized that, okay, after several long distance movements, they will stay in one spot, which is their nesting site. Because both these examples are females. So that's why they're stable there, because they didn't move and they're incubating. But there are some other nests that we found that we didn't see the movement. So the two examples that with movements are actually sub-adult females. And the ones at the bottom here without movement are from the adults. So we now have some ideas about why they move and how they move, and then what's the reason. And I'll show you from the map to explain to you what's the phenomena from the more biological perspective. So here I'll show you the monthly polygon. That means all the polygons included all the roosting site within that month. So here from the earliest is 2018, and now it's October, November, December. So pay attention now, this is the early breeding season. So you can see some long distance movement, January, February, and then you can see now is the breeding season. Now it's a non-breeding season. You can see they are pretty much staying in one spot. But now again, the early breeding season next year from August and September, they're staying put. But October, they're moving long distance again. And then they stay in one spot, which is this nesting site. So through these examples, you can see that this is a sub-adult female, and you can see that the breeding season or the cycles really affect their movement patterns, and they will tend to move around, try to find their mate during the early breeding season. I'll show you another example of a male one, and this one is released not from the capture site. So the first 2 months, they're actually moving among the different habitat, but after 2 months, he goes back to his original capture site. And then pretty much for the next couple months, they stay in only one spot. So what does that really mean? So through this, the first identify the key habitat. Before, it's like we don't really know where they are. They are so elusive, and because most of the birders have never seen them. And we do know some key habitat now, and so it's like maybe just 30 to 50 meters to a farmhouse, but since the act of and the humans are not overlapped, so we really don't know that the grassland, military land, and the agricultural lands are very important habitat for them, especially from a roosting or the breeding perspective. I think the next key thing is that, okay, now we know their important habitat. How can we maintain or manage? And so that means they won't stay the same. You cannot protect this species in the old school style, like, okay, I will have a protected area so nobody can go in there, and I can protect that. No, the trees comes in, the shrubs comes in, and it will not be suitable for the grass-owl anymore. So it needs the disturbance, and it is overlapped with human activities, because this disturbance can be natural and can be anthropogenic. So I think the next step is to understand how this disturbance influence the habitat. So and compared to how they move in between and how to use those mosaic habitats. And we found that they use their roost site repeatedly in both breeding and non-breeding seasons, but they do move around. And especially for a sub-adult female at the early breeding season, they will perform the long distance movement and try to find mate. but we didn't see anything like that for adult male. And they tend to be sedentary and stay in one spot. And we're assuming that they're defending their territory, especially during the breeding season. So based on the differences between season, sex, and the age, we know that they will have very different home range and movement pattern among different individuals. So it is very important to the next step to know, to get more sample size, to know how we are actually, what's the information we need to know in order to conserve them. So the future directions are the following. As I mentioned, we have about 17 good data about the owls for the different sex and age combinations, but there's a lot that we still don't know. Something like, do females change mate each season, or do adult female looking for males as well and change each year? Those are the things need the long-term studies to know the results. And now we're focusing on roosting sites. And are they equaling to breeding sites? We don't really know now because the battery don't really last that long. So a lot of the cases we track them, and then for quite some months, and then we are about to know the breeding, and the tag stopped because of the batteries or some technical problems. So we really need to know what's their breeding site characteristics, and do they hold territory, or because in some areas we know that within their nest can be just within 200 to 300 meters. So they can be pretty close, but what's the density and how are those related to the habitat quality? They're still not unknown. And also, we also really interesting in the dispersal patterns for juveniles. We actually have one case that within 4 months, the birds move from one spot to another spot, which is 80 to 90 kilometers repeatedly. And we don't know why, and we don't know how they found their ways. So there's a lot of things we still need to know about this species. And at last, I want to thank our funding agency, the Forestry Bureau, again. And without their support, these studies cannot be done. And also, with a lot of friends and people helping in this project. So we also want to thank them. And that's all my presentation. And thanks for listening. Welcome questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Joe. By the way, you already past 20 minutes, so if you have questions, then we can go back to the question and answer for Dr. Joe. So our next presenter will be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
So our next presenter is Mr. S. Sangeeta Sailas. Okay. And he will talk about factors influencing habitat use of owls in and around community reserves in Meghalaya, Northeast India. I'm sure this is a very interesting topic for you all to hear. Okay, I pass my button to you, Mr. Sangeet.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start my presentation. So you can see my screen now, right? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so hello everyone, good morning or good afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. So I'm Sangeet Silas, and I'm a PhD student at the University of South Bohemia in the Czech Republic. But today I'll be talking about the project Factors Influencing Habitat Use of Owls in and Around Community Reserves in Meghalaya, Northeast India, that I was a part of when I was associated with the Salim Ali Center for Ornithology and Natural History in India. So Northeast India is a part of a global biodiversity hotspot, the Indo-Burma region, and it's home to a number of range-restricted and threatened species. However, Northeast India currently faces a number of anthropogenic pressures, such as the shortening fallow periods in June or shifting cultivation cycles, hunting, logging, and even encroachment into protected areas. And coming to the protected area network in Northeast India, the majority is comprised of community reserves, which are actually community conserved areas where the land ownership is with the local indigenous people, and they manage these reserves in consultation with the state forest department. And it's also the case that in many areas, community reserves are the few places in the landscape that also have old growth forests, which are definitely important for tree cavity nesting species like owls. And although India has 36 different species of owls, information on their habitat use is largely lacking. And however, this information is extremely crucial for conservation and management interventions, especially because the old growth forest specialist owls of India, such as the spot-bellied eagle owl, the brown wood owl, and the Oriental bay owl, are thought to be in decline. So with this context, we came up with two objectives. One was to assess the influence of ecological correlates of habitat on the occupancy and abundance of owls in the study area. And two, to test whether community reserves are actually acting as refugia sites for owls. So for the objective one, we surveyed in and around 4 community reserves in East and West Garo Hills districts in Meghalaya. And then for the study design, we overlaid 4 square kilometer plots around each of the community reserves. And then we divided these plots into 16 500 into 500 meter grids. And then we surveyed at least 50% of the grids in each of the 4 locations. And these surveys were conducted between January and March of 2020. And this landscape was a mosaic made up of plantations, agriculture fields, settlements, and forests having both secondary and primary vegetation. Now, coming to the owl surveys, we had 3 survey protocols. The first one was listening to spontaneous calls, where we would listen to spontaneously calling owls for 5 minutes. This would be followed by the call playback method, where we play back the calls of the owls, starting from the smallest to the largest, where each call would be played for 30 seconds, followed by a response period of 1 minute. And finally, you would do a spotlight search around the survey station to look for any non-responsive owls. During our owl surveys, we also measured sampling covariates such as moon phase, temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, and survey start time. And for the site covariates, we considered a number of them, including vegetation parameters relating to tree, canopy, and understory characteristics, a disturbance index that we created by summing scores that we gave for felling, logging, grazing, and evidence of recent fire, and also spatial parameters such as slope, terrain, ruggedness, and distance variables that we extracted from digital elevation models and satellite imagery. And for the analysis, we used single species, single season occupancy models to model the effect of habitat variables on occupancy, and N-mixture models to model the effect of the variables on abundance. This was done using the package Unmarked in the R software. Now coming to objective 2, which was to test whether community reserves are actually acting as refugia sites, we combined the data from the aforementioned 2020 survey with the data from an owl survey conducted by a colleague of ours, Aritri Sarkar, in 2019, which was done in both Garo and Khasi Hills. And this survey used the same owl survey methodology. The only difference was that instead of choosing points by gridding the locations. Trails were walked and points were selected along those trails, both inside and outside community reserves. And still, the points were selected in such a manner that they were separated by at least 500 meters. And then for the data analysis, we divided the points into three categories. Outside community reserves, which represent the highest level of disturbance where all kinds of developmental activities can take place. Inside community reserves with secondary forest, which represent an intermediate level of disturbance, where logging or shifting cultivation has happened within the last 20 years. And the third category was inside community reserves with primary forest, which represent the least amount of disturbance, which are essentially undisturbed forests. And then we used Mann, Whitney, Yu, and Kruskal-Wallace tests to test whether there was any significant difference in owl detections across and between these categories. Coming to the results, across the 2019 and 2020 surveys, we detected 8 species of owls, and they were the collared and Asian barred owlets, the collared scops and mountain scops owls, the Oriental bay owl and the brown hawk owl, the brown wood owl, and the brown fish owl. Coming to the 2020 survey, we detected 5 species of owls, and they were, of course, a subset of the ones that we mentioned before. And among these, the most number of detections were for the brown wood owl, a medium-sized owl, and an old growth forest specialist. The mountain scops owl, which is a small owl said to be found in evergreen and deciduous forests. The collared owlet, which is the smallest species of owl found in India and said to inhabit open hill forests. Now, coming to the results from the occupancy and abundance modeling, in the case of detection probability of the brown wood owl, we found that wind speed had a negative effect. In the case of the mountain scops owl, temperature and humidity had positive effects on its detection probability. And in the case of the collared owlet, again, we found that temperature had a positive effect on its detection probability. Coming to occupancy and abundance, we found that in the case of the brown wood owl, both slope and distance to stream had negative effects, meaning that this species was more likely to occur. It was more abundant in areas that had gentle slopes and were closer to streams. And one reason for this could be prey distribution, because a congeneric species of the brown wood owl, the spotted owl, is also known to occur in areas that have gentle slopes, and this is linked to prey distribution. And the association with streams could also be due to prey distribution, because an important prey group of the brown wood owl, which are flying squirrels, are known to also be associated with streams. They're known to be found closer to streams. Another reason for the association with streams could be thermoregulation, because temperatures are known to be lower closer to streams. We also found that GBH, or girth at breast height of trees, had a positive effect on the brown wood owl's abundance. And this is understandable because the brown wood owl, being a medium-sized owl, would need large tree cavities as roosting and nesting sites. And those large tree cavities would, of course, be found in large trees. Coming to the mountain scops owl, we found that distance to stream and disturbance had positive effects on its occupancy and abundance, meaning that this species was more likely to occur and more abundant in areas that were away from streams and were relatively more disturbed. Now, these relationships of the mountain scops owl have a parallel in another species of owl called the flammulated owl, which is found in North America. The flammulated owl is known to avoid large bodies of water due to its intolerance to humidity, which is linked to thermoregulation. And the flammulated owl is also known to nest in areas that are relatively more disturbed and have more gaps in the canopy, which would hence support a denser understory and a higher diversity of prey species such as insects and rodents. So it could be something very similar that is driving the relationship of the mountain scops owl as well with distance to stream and disturbance. In the case of the collared owlet, we found that slope had a positive effect on its occupancy and abundance, but none of the other habitat variables had any significant or substantial effect on its occupancy and abundance. So we think that this means that the collared owlet is a generalist species, or that variables that we did not consider are influencing the occupancy and abundance of this species. Coming to the results from objective 2, we found that the Mann-Whitney and Kruskal-Wallis tests indicated that there were indeed statistically significant differences between detections of owls across the three categories. In the case of the collared owlet, collared scops owl, the Asian barred owlet, and the brown wood owl. With the collared scops owl and Asian barred owlet being detected higher inside community reserves having secondary forests, while the brown wood owl was detected much higher inside community reserves with primary forests. And we also found that two more species, the collared owlet and the mountain scops owl, were also found detected higher inside community reserves with secondary forests, but this was not statistically significant. And even two species, the brownfish owl and the oriental bay owl, which were only detected once during our surveys. These detections were also from inside community reserves. So that shows how community reserves are actually acting as refugia sites for owls in this region, with the highest detections for owls being inside community reserves of secondary forests, which represent an intermediate level of disturbance. So we think that this supports the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, which says that maximum species diversity will be found in areas under intermediate disturbance regimes. But at the same time, we have to note that the species which were found higher inside community reserves of secondary forests were all small owls, and which would not need the large trees and tree cavities for nesting and roosting sites, the likes of which would be more likely to occur in the primary vegetation, which is where we found higher detections of the brown wood owl, an old growth forest specialist. So I'd like to conclude by saying that we found species-specific differences in sampling covariates influencing detection probability of owls, which should be taken into account when designing future owl surveys. We also found that distance to stream and GBH were important site covariates influencing the occupancy and abundance of owls, and this indicates the need to conserve streams and old growth forests in this region. And finally, we found that community reserves are actually acting as refugia sites for owls, with higher detections of owls inside the community reserves. And specifically, brown wood owls were detected higher inside community reserves with primary vegetation. And this indicates the need to maintain and further protect community reserves, especially those having primary vegetation in Meghalaya. So I'd like to thank all the people mentioned, people and organizations mentioned on this slide, and specifically the Ministry of Forest Environment, Climate Change, and the Raptor Research and Conservation Foundation for funding this study. And of course the GAROs, because without them, the study wouldn't have happened. So thank you.
So you have about 7 minutes for the question and answer sessions. So if you want to ask questions from Mr. Saget, you can unmute your microphones. Or you can use the chat box.
Why we had considered 500 meters?
So we use 500 meters because, I mean, the grid size is 500 meters because the territory size of most of the small and medium-sized owls, fall within this range. And we wanted to keep our, points independent from each other. So that's why we chose.
Any references for that?
Any differences for what?
Any reference for those studies where we have
Yeah. We have actually published the occupancy and abundance modeling in ARRCN in December, and I haven't given the references on the slide, but then you can find the references in the paper.
It will be nice if you can share that link of the paper out here.
Sure. I'll put it in the chat.
That will be a great thing for all of us who are the beginners in this
Sure,
the
sure.
uh,
Definitely.
thanks for your thanks. A
Thank
very
you.
good
Thank you for
presentation, and very less is known about the region till now.
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Sangu.
The
You have
Amur Falcon story, which has been highlighted, nobody looks in owls there.
So put the link in the chat.
right. So yeah, we have to. Yeah, sorry. To Mr. Sagit, you have a one question actually. I just checked the chat box. It's from Sakit Ahmed. So he asked something like this: did you find any difference in breeding season on all the species that you detected during the survey?
Okay, but so we actually surveyed during the same season, which was during winter. So we don't really know about differences based on the season. But then there were some species that were not detected during the time that we presented. We surveyed, like the Oriental Scops-Owl, for example. So there was this time. So my survey was done between January and March, and then during that entire period, I did not, detect this species, the Oriental Scops-Owl. But then and that was when then the whole lockdown happened, and I was stuck in a town called Tura. And during that time, in April and May, that time I could hear the Oriental Scops-Owl. So there could definitely be differences, in vocal activity of species depending on the season. But then because our but then we didn't survey in those, in different seasons to get an idea. But then there could very likely be such differences. That could be like scope for future studies. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Sangeet. A very good presentation from you. And then I'm sure that Mr. Yun Chien Wang. Yeah, I'm sure that you could not wait to present your works, your finding. I would like to pass my baton to Mr. Yun Chien. He's going to talk about the nest site selections of black kites in Pingtung, Taiwan. Okay, Mr. Yun Chien Wang, are you ready?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yunjie Huang, and I'm from National Pingtung University of Science and Technology, Taiwan. Okay, and I would first like to thank my research team and our friendly Raptor Research Group of Taiwan and our funding authority, the Forest Bureau of Taiwan. Black kites are medium-sized raptor, widely distributed across Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. And they can come in great numbers in certain parts of the world. You can see on the right bottom corner in which in India, they have ritualized feeding and they have tens of thousands of birds in just one city. So they are gregarious opportunists, often foraging close to human activity in waste dumps and slaughterhouses, ports for human refuse and animal carcasses. But this close relationship with human activities make black kites easily exposed to habitat loss and secondary poisoning. In Taiwan, black kites were used to be very, very common across the lowlands, but the population dropped dramatically due to secondary poisoning of pesticides and rodenticides in the late 20th century. A research from sighting records analyzed that only 19% of black kites' potential habitat lies within protected areas. So the strategy of using protected areas is not a way of conservation of black kites. In recent observations, we found that the foraging of black kites are closely tied to primary industries in southern Taiwan. As you can see in the video here, that the black kites are chasing the farmers when they turn the soil, and they dig out dead animals for them to forage. And also in fishing pools where fishers they toss bait for fish and shrimps, and this is also an opportunity seized by black kites. And in satellite studies, we tracked fledglings of black kites use farmlands and forests as their primary habitats. In 2020, we installed trail cameras on nearby beside the nest of black kites in 3 different habitats of southern Taiwan, and we found that nestling diet differed in different environments. As you can see, the nest by the reservoir, the black kites eat primarily fish, and the nest by farmlands, here you can see they eat primarily birds. And the nest in deep forest upstream, they have the most diverse diet with human refuse and shrimps from the stream, and also muntjacs, probably carcasses fed. And according to research about 20 years ago on northern Taiwan, nests of black kites are mostly located on slope more than 30 degrees and within the mountain ranges. But it's only mostly statistically. And these studies above can outline the key habitat where kite used to breed in their life cycle. So my research purpose is to identify nest size selection by comparing nests with random location in 2 different spatial scales. One is nest size scale and the other is home range scale. In field surveys, we search for breeding pairs in the Pingtung County and observe their behaviors like mating and bringing nest materials and food back to the nest, or searching for fledglings just beside the nest. Then we record the GPS location of the nest, and we analyze further geographical information. To select random nests, according to the literature, kites frequently survey a range of 7 to 10 kilometers before breeding. And the breeding pair actively defend 500 meters of range. And this range is also used for hunting by the female. So we selected 5 kilometers, a random nest within the 5 kilometers of range, and analyzed the 500 meters range as the nest size scale. And for the home range scale, we used the satellite tracked individuals from southern Taiwan to generate the habitat used of black kites. As you can see, this light pink here. This is the area which I used to random select my home range. And so this is my study design. With nest, we compare random nest within home range scale and within home range, and with home range scale, we compare home range with random home range in the habitat used by black kites. Variables are listed here, and mostly habitat composition, and variables I think would be affecting their nest size selection. And the forest edge here is manually drawn distant to the edge of large intact forest, as you can see in the following figure. It's a special feature of Pingtung. Data analysis is used as follows: Welch 2 sample t-test and Pearson trace test for differences between nest and random locations, and QGIS for spatial analysis, and R for statistical analysis. We found 30 black kite nests across the Pingtung County in the breeding season of 2021. As you can see here, the forest edge, as I mentioned earlier, is quite clear. On the right, we have the nest size scale with the random nest selected, and on the left we have the home range scale with random home range, the small square here, scattered across the habitat used by black kites. Their nest is quite special. You can see large amounts of human refuse as decorations. This is the kind of environment we have found nest in. So there's a forest deep within the forest here on top, and slope upon the stream bank, and plantations, forest near the farmlands, and this here is quite special. This one is special. It's just near the road beside human residence. Out of the 30 nests we found, we were able to observe 18 breeding outputs. Only one failed, with resulting in 17 successful nests, and at least 28 fledglings. These nests were located in lowland forests, close to communal roosts. As you can see here, they're located in mosaic-like landscapes filled with farmland, forests, and streams. But the nest density is quite low, with a mean of 1,500 meters as a distance to the nearest neighbor, which is compared to other countries, this is quite low, and we suspect this is due to the low population, resulting in unsaturated nesting habitat, which you can see. These areas are also potential nest sites that can be populated by future populations. And in nest size scale, the habitat composition doesn't differ in all 5 categories, with forest and farmland as their main composition. In Other variables, only nearest building and nearest stream, are significantly closer. They are closer to the nearest building and closer to the nearest stream. Under this small scale, buildings are mostly sheds and cottages from farming or hunting, and these small buildings are scattered across landscapes. You see here, and these kind of small buildings can attract certain prey fauna, and like road rats and sparrows for blackheads to eat. And closer to stream could provide other aquatic resources and carcasses from upstream, fish and other invertebrates. But in this scale, selection is not significant, suggesting that the area nearby are all suitable for potential nest sites, but it is not occupied only because of low population density. In home range scale, 4 of the categories differed significantly. Kites selected more forest coverage and less settlements, water, and open areas. And other variables, the most important 3 are the nearest roost, closer to roost sites, and closer to the forest edge distance, and sites with higher NDVI values. The avoiding of high coverage of settlement and preferring areas with higher NDVI and forest cover could mean higher prey availability and accommodation for a bigger population. Distance to forage edge provided food resources from both sides of the habitat, the left side with farmlands and the right side of the forest, and simultaneously provides the protection of a large and intact forest, which is harder to spot for predators or human for exploitation. And closer to communal roosts could be the socialistic nature of black kites. They can pass information on food resources between species. We also observed that kites, satellite tracked kites also roost near foraging sites after foraging. In the historical sites of Taiwan, we mostly see them deeply situated in river valleys and mountains. But this could be the result of selection caused by secondary poisoning and overexploitation. As you can see on the right, the yellow ones are the nests found before 2007, and the red ones are the nests we discovered after 2020. So the kite population has slowly recovered with the promotion of eco-friendly farming, as mentioned earlier by Dr. Lin, and more nests are found nearer to human communities in recent years. But the threat still is there. We attached satellite trackers on nestlings for about more than 5 years, and it shows that secondary poisoning remains the biggest threat, as we have lost many tracked kites due to secondary poisoning. So in conclusion, nest density here in Pingtung is comparatively low due to low population. And because of their breeding in loose colonies, nest site selection is not significant in the nest site scale. But different variables affects in different scales. Kites preferred buildings closer to buildings and streams in nest site scale, but in home range scale, they selected habitat closer to large forest edge and nearest closer to communal roost with high NDVI as nests. And This could be the result of their selection on landscape level, influenced by their socialistic nature. And in future study, we aim to analyze historical nest sites of Taiwan and establish a more precise prediction model, and to test if model differs in populations and temporal scale, like in nest sites in 20 years before and now. Okay, thank you for listening. This is my presentation.
Thank you so much, Yun Chen Huang. So I would like to open for the question and answer sessions. You can, to the audience, you can use the microphone or the chat to ask questions from him. Yeah, there's one question here for you.
I know what is the main source of poison.
Yeah. You can read
Uh,
the chat box. May I? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for asking, Mr. Sabedi.
Yeah, Tusi Subidi.
Oh, Subedi. Okay. The main source of poisoning is due to secondary poisoning. The source is mostly rodenticides to get rid of rats, and pesticide and intentional poisoning pesticides to get rid of pest birds, like birds that eat on crops, mostly doves and ducks and sparrows. And kites eat, the black kites eat those species and get poisoned through the food chain.
Okay, so we have another 5 minutes. Maybe we can have 2 more questions from the audiences. Okay, anybody? Yeah, you can use the microphone to ask from here. All right. So we can wait for another 1 minute. So just be patient, Yun Chen. Yeah, probably they type on the chat. Okay, now we go on to our next presenter. For the next presentation is a recorded presentations. It will be presented by Chilwin Chaiburn from Thailand. He's going to present about nesting of Jerdon's Baza, Aviceda jerdoni, in Phetchaburi province, Western Thailand. So, the technician, you can start the recording. Please.
Hello everyone, my name is Chiwin. I'm from Thailand, and I am a mentee in the Youth Mentorship Program Lab of Laboratory Research and Conservation Medicine, Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, Nisaetus University, and also I'm a bird watcher. Today I will talk about nest of Jerdon Baza at Phetchaburi province, which is the first observation and study in Thailand. But in Asia, they already have 4 papers that study on it. And at the end of presentation, I have a little bit of comparison between the nest in Thailand and other countries. But first of all, let me introduce you about Jerdon Baza in Thailand. Jerdon Baza is a partial migrant in the region, a resident population breed in northeast, southern, and western Thailand. A male and female of Jerdon Baza are different. A male has a gray face and bar in the chest to belly, while a female has brown face and also has a bar too, but the bar is a spot that light up. The voice of female and male is different too. I will play it. This is the voice of female. And this is the voice of male. So as you hear, the voice of male is more aggressive and louder than a female. The observation was made in a ground high, with 50 meters far from the nest for 5 days, and then I moved close to the nest for 20 meters for the rest of the observation period. I used 8 by 42 binoculars and 20 to 60 power telescope to observation the nest. I used the Foresti 550 for measuring the tree height and GPS 64S for the coordination around the nest area. The photograph was taken by a full-frame camera with 200 to 500 f5.6 lens. The observation was from 7 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. daily for 10 days from 3rd to 13th of June in this year. The number of play delivery, play type, and parent sex on each delivery was recorded. The nest was located on a Buddha coconut tree, which was approximately 36 meters tall with a diameter at breast height of 1.6 meters. At dry evergreen forest in Gangkaja National Park in Phetchaburi province, west of Thailand, in 371 meters high from the sea level. The nest was made from small stick approximately 30 centimeters in diameter and 10 centimeters deep in the oval shape, places below the treetop 2 meters and high 34 meters above the ground. And here is the Buddha coconut fruit, and this is where the nest located in the canopy of the tree. And if you place this coordination on a Google map, you will find where the nest was located. The timeline in observation and development of chick plumage. On 28th of June, a bird watcher found a nest with 3 juveniles in a white with black spot plumage. Assuming from the picture, juvenile was approximately 21 days old. On 3rd of June, I went to monitoring the nest, and on 8th of June, 2 juveniles perched outside on a branch near the nest and went back to the nest in the evening. On 10th of June, all juveniles fresh in the morning and never came back to the nest again. From 11 to 13 of June, we keep follow-up and found 3 juveniles staying separate far from the nest for 50 to 100 meters. Female and males are still delivering the play for juveniles. Out of 128 attempts that were recorded, 69 attempts tied for prey were identified. Prey composition comprised of lizard, 28 attempts or 40.5%, insect, 18 attempts or 26.2%, mantis 12 attempts or 17.4%, green caterpillar 10 attempts or 14.5%, and snake 1 attempt or 1.4%. This is the video that shows juvenile having a snake. I will play the video. So here is the snake. Male and female are both feeding chick by carrying play in the beak. Before and after feeding the young, male perch on the guarding branch for 10 minutes. In comparison, female fly direct to the nest, feeding chick and quickly fly away. Out of 128 attempts, female feed chick for 58 attempts or 45%. Male feed 48 attempts or 38%. And unknown sexes 22 attempts. In approximately third feed start at 7 a.m. and the last feed end at 5 p.m. approximately. The frequency is around 20 minutes per one attempt. This is some interesting behavior during the observation. Almost every morning on 8 to 9 a.m., male guarding the territory by perching in the guarding branch, making noise, and gliding around the nest area, while female add the fresh leaves on the nest in the raining days. This is the comparison of the nest and play between nests in Thailand and other countries. I used 4 factors for comparisons. First factor is the elevation. In Thailand is the lowest elevation at 371 meters. Second factor is the type of tree. In Thailand is Buddha coconut, which is different from other country. Third factor is the nest tree height. In Thailand, Indonesia, and West Bengal, India are almost the same height, but in Nepal and in Kerala, India is different. The last factor is the prey. In Thailand, lizards is the major prey, and other country is different. I would like to thank Professor Chayan Gesondokbua, who is my mentor. Washilavit was a birder who found the nest, rangers at Gangachar National Park for supporting me in the field, And this study was financially supported by the Thailand Raptor Research Fund, Asian Raptor Research Conservation Network for giving me a chance to share with you today. Last but not least, I would like to thank all of you for listening me today. It was a pleasure being here. For the question, please email me. I would love to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
All right, so that's the presentation for Chiwin Chainbun. Unfortunately, he's not here. If you have any question for him, you can email to him, but you can put your question also in the chat box, and our technician will gather all the questions and give to Mr. Chu Bin. Okay, thank you. And then for our next presentation is still a recording presentation. It will be presented by Chiu Seng Cheong. He will talk about the nesting behaviors of the Oriental Honey-Buzzard Pernis, Pernis ptilorhyncus, torquatus in Ipoh, Perak, Malaysia. So I'm going to pass my button to you, Mr. Chiu Seng Cheong.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm presenting on the observation on the nesting of the male Oriental Honey-Buzzard torquatus with the female Oriental Honey-Buzzard torquatus but Tweeddale morph. This observation was carried out from December 2020 to April 2021. Observers were from the Malaysian Nature Society Perak branch Perth group. Before going on to those slides, I would like to present an update on another pair of Oriental Honey-Buzzard torquatus that nested in the golf course from 1998 to 2009. I presented a paper and poster presentation on this pair during the fourth conference. Thereafter, the pair continued to nest a total of 14 times. From 13 nests in 1998 to 2008, they produced a total of 17 chicks, but only 12 chicks survived. The 14th and final nesting in 2009 was unable to be observed as we did not have access to the nest tree. Thereafter, from 2009, the male never appeared again, and we did not come across another OHP nesting until 2020. One significant nesting from the pair in the golf course was that I observed that the pair was able to carry out consecutive nesting not too long after the chick fledged. The first time was a failure, but the second time was in 2008 was a success. The juvenile was also seen helping the adults feed the younger seedlings and also to protect them from large beetles. This video that I'm going to show you shows the older sibling feeding the younger siblings. Photo show the elder sibling together with the younger sibling. I will now go on to my presentation on the recent pair nesting. This is the male torquatus with the female torquatus Tweeddale morph. On 25th December and 31st December 2020, the above pair was sighted building a nest by our group members and also the second occur around Simi village or Kampung Simi. The difference this time was that the female was a Tweeddale morph, and this is the first record of us observing a Tweeddale morph, one of the Tweeddale morph nesting. Later on, nearby residents informed us that they had noticed the presence of the pair in their vicinity since early December 2020. The nest was located in a vacant car park of an unused abandoned cinema and next to a traffic light junction intersection. The nest was 40 feet high on a plane tree. And surrounding the nest tree were houses, shop lots, and also a market about 600 meters away. Nest building was carried out by both the female and the male. Two foundations were built before the second foundation was selected as the nest host branch. The first foundation was built about 25 feet high. We observed the nest building was most active in mid-mornings, and both male and female collected branches and twigs. Nest duration, building duration was 5.5 to 6 weeks. We also observed addition of ticks to enlarge and reinforce the nest, which continued during the incubation period and while carrying of the chick to the nest. Incubation. During the incubation period, both the female and the male incubated the egg, but the female played the primary role. Incubation to egg hatching took 35 days. Our first visual of the chick with white downy feathers was when it was at 12 days old. Both the female and the male guarded the chick in the nest for the first few weeks, with the female playing the main role. The male became the primary provider of food, while the female also occasionally went to look for food. From 32 days old, either adult would stand guard on nest tree instead of inside the nest, and the chick was left in the nest by itself. From 41 days old, the chick was left unguarded in the nest, and both adults would fly off. And video shows you the chick together with the female. Type and food and prey brought back to young consisted of 3 types. The first was honeycomb, bee honeycomb, and hornet nest containing a larvae. We also observed duckling brought back to the chick, and also bird hatchlings, mostly bird-named oriole, black-named oriole, and dove hatchlings. Both the male and female fed the chick inside the nest, with female playing the main role. Here in the video is a chick together with a Tweeddale morph female. Another food source that was brought back was bee larvae in the honeycomb. And this is the male. This photo shows the male with the chick and the female. Here is the female bringing a large piece of honeycomb back. And we observed that the chick was able to extract larvae on its own from the honeycomb when it was 35 days old onwards. For bird hatchlings, the chick was only able to eat the bird hatchling on its own from 39 days old. Here the male brings back a black-named oriole hatchling, and this is the dove hatchling, bird hatchling. In this video, the female is the young with a bit of a bird hatchling. The next video shows the male bringing back a fat hatchling and passing it to the young. This next series of photos shows the growth of the chick plumage starting from 26 days old, then 37 days old, 41 days old, and 52 days old. It shows the specific growth of the feathers. For the preparation of the chick towards fledging, we follow the normal routine of first starting by doing wing stretching exercises, and then followed by static flapping of wings in the nest. Thereafter, we started to jump and flap the wings in the nest. We jump from one end to the other end of the nest while flapping the wing. And after that, we started to climb onto branches to learn to perch. And thereafter, just before fledging, we started to jump and flap the wings from higher perch into the nest. First video shows the juvenile stretching his wings. Second video shows the chick flapping and walking in the nest. Third video shows the chick climbing onto the branch to learn to perch. This series of photos is after the juvenile perch, and you perch on the branch next to the tree or perch on branches within the nest tree itself. After fledging, the juvenile stayed around the nest site for the first week, and food continued to be provided to the fledged juvenile in the nest for the next 3 weeks by the adults. The juvenile finally left the nest recently after it was 75 days old. Summary of the nesting cycle: nest building and courtship took 5.5 weeks. Incubation to egg hatching took 35 days. The juvenile fledged at 54 days old, and the whole cycle of incubation to fledging was 89 days. Stress and risk faced by the chick was that just before it fledged, it fell out of the nest while flapping before fledging at 30 days old. It fell onto a lower branch around 20 feet below the nest. Luckily, it fell onto another branch. It took the chick 1.5 hours of walking on branches, short hops, and safe short flight to return back safely into the nest. We also noticed once that it was harassed by 2 large-billed crows. And the chick also had was also taken by poachers. But thanks to the quick action by MNS Perak group member and cooperation from third parties, the chick was traced and returned back to the nest after 3.25 hours. The next slide shows a comparison between the offspring of a torquatus male and torquatus female Tweeddale with a regular torquatus male and torquatus female chick. At the top is the one with the Tweeddale from the Tweeddale mother. This is from the both regular brown torquatus. This one at 30 days old, the two from the female mother, and these are from the regular young torquatus. This is at 37 days old, and this is from the regular torquatus. This is from the Tweeddale female, and this is from the regular torquatus. This is at 49 days old, and this is from the regular torquatus, and this one is from the Tweeddale female, and this is from the regular torquatus. So for this pairing, we observe that the juvenile followed more, the genes of the torquatus were stronger, and the plumage followed more to the torquatus, to the Tweeddale mock. We do not have any photos after the juvenile left the vicinity, but during the first initial courtship and next breeding period, the first year sub-adult, which we believe is from the nest nesting, was also seen occasionally at the ovulation. But this juvenile did no longer appear when the nesting commenced. So we believe that around almost 1 year old, the plumage will look almost similar to this sub-adult. I would like to thank other members of the observation team and also for the use of the photos. Thank you, and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chius and Chiom. Since that we are far behind the schedule, to the audiences, please write your question in the chat box, because we need to move on with our next presenter. It's lucky that Miss Brigitte Berger-Geiger, she's here. It's actually a recorded presentations. She's going to talk about breeding biology, social interactions, and conservation of the semi-colonial Montagu's Harriers in the Spanish Extremadura. Right.
No sound.
Yeah, I cannot listen, technicians.
First of all, I would like to say hello to all of you. I was very pleased to get the opportunity to present our fieldwork for conservation of Montagu's Harrier in southwest Spain. Thank you, Puan, very much for the invitation and your help. Because of time lag, this presentation was pre-recorded, but if you have any questions, you can reach me via email. On this picture, you see a gray male flying together with a brownish female, the male being smaller and lighter than the female. In my presentation, first I will inform you about distribution and breeding biology. Second, I will tell shortly about fieldwork in which many volunteers from different countries were involved. Third, I present some details about social behavior and predators at the nest that we got by trail cameras. And finally, I will report about movements that we could follow in detail by installing GPS GSM tags on birds. Montagu's Harrier is a medium-sized semi-colonial migratory raptor that breeds from Western Europe to Asia. Birds from Western Europe fly to the Sahel to overwinter and come back to their breeding sites in April. The red circle highlights the Iberian Peninsula, that is Spain and Portugal, a core area of Montagu's Harrier's breeding range. The dark blue ellipse shows their wintering sites. According to BirdLife International 2017, the number of breeding pairs in Europe is estimated between 55,000 and 90,000. Russia holding more than 70%, it's the blue color. On the European level, Montagu's Harrier is included in the red list as a species of least concern. That means the population remains more or less stable. This categorization is based on a very large estimation of the breeding population in European Russia, possibly unreliable due to the few data in this part of its distribution range. In the core areas of Western Europe, France and the Iberian Peninsula, the orange color, it is considered vulnerable or conservation dependent. And in Central Europe, it is critically endangered. I do not know if there is any information about the conservation status in the Asian population, which are thought to contain a significant part of the global breeding population. We find a marked population decline for Montagu's Harrier in Spain from about 6,500 breeding pairs in 2006 to only about 5,000 breeding pairs in 2017. The population in the Spanish Extremadura, the blue circle, suffered a steep decline from about 1,000 breeding pairs in 2006 to only 600 breeding pairs in 2017. Our study area, La Serena, is located in the southeast of Extremadura, and in the last years the population of Montagu's Harrier suffered a really dramatic decrease from 170 breeding pairs to only 70 breeding pairs in 2019. The species originally inhabited semi-natural habitats like grasslands, but also dunes, heather fields, marshes and steppes. With the intensification of agriculture, the species switched to breeding in cereal crops in most of Western Europe in the second half of the 20th century. Montagu's Harriers are food generalists, feeding on small mammals, small birds, reptiles and insects. In Extremadura, land use is mainly a mosaic of cereal, as you see here in the picture, pasture, mainly sheep, and fallow land. Montagu's Harrier find both breeding habitats and hunting areas there. Montagu's Harrier nest in loose colonies in a flat landscape occupied by a pseudo-steppe. Montagu's Harrier arrive in the breeding areas of Extremadura in March or early April. Courtship period and nest site selection may take 2 to 3 weeks. Onset of egg laying normally occurs between mid-April and mid-May. Clutch size is usually 4 to 5 eggs. Egg laying occurs within shorter or longer intervals. So within a clutch we find chicks of different age. Incubation and nestling period each is about 30 days. The male supplies all the food during the incubation and early nestling stages, calling the female of the nest for food passes. Immediately after the aerial food pass, the female will return to the nest and feed her chicks. Now let's go on to fieldwork and conservation measures. When the species nests in cereals, harvesting activities endanger the nestlings of Montagu's Harriers if they are not yet able to fly at harvest time. In our study area, conservation campaigns started in 1999. Volunteers, that is 2 to 10 persons per season from different countries, have worked in the fields to locate as many nests as possible. Nests were located by observing the females landing at the nest site after a food pass. Located nests were visited and marked by fixing plastic stripes at vegetation stalks around the nest. For each located nest, we noted the following variables: GPS coordinates, clutch size, and age of fledglings. Conservation measures applied were first asking the farmers to delay harvest date. When this was not an option, the drivers of the combines left an unharvested patch of 4 to 4 meters around the nest. When the combine had not left a satisfactory patch, some straw was put around the nest to offer some rudimentary protection to the nestlings. Certainly, every year, many nests that were not localized before harvesting activities have started would be lost, either the nestlings being killed by the machines or being left without protection. They would soon be predated by foxes, raptors, or wild storks. From 2001 to 2017, we documented more than 1,700 breeding attempts in our paper published in the Journal of Ornithology. We assessed factors influencing breeding biology and breeding success or breeding failure. We found that laying date was retarded up to 3 days over the study period, thus strengthening the effect of productivity being lower for later breeding pairs. Whereas harvesting date advanced by 7 days over the study period may be as an effect of climate change. Earlier harvest dates may facilitate predation events. In spite of nest protection measures, we found a significant trend for productivity decrease over the study period. Not only the population size decreased, that's the blue line, but also the number of successful breeding pairs, the brown line. In some years, the number of predated nests, that is the gray line, was much higher than the number of successful nests. We adapted conservation efforts and put fences around the nests. The birds, including the fledglings, soon adopted the posts as a place to rest and watch the surroundings. Trail cameras produced thousands of pictures and gave us insight to what happened in the nest. In order to find out about predation events, we installed trail cameras at some nests. On the left picture, the camera is fixed on a post and focused at the nest center. On the right picture, you see a fenced nest taken from a camera that is installed outside the nest at an altitude of about 1,50 meters. We could not find any predation during daytime, thus ensuring the colonial anti-predator behavior. Possible predators like raptors, that is black kites and eagles, and even foxes as seen in the field, would be mobbed by several individuals of Montagu's Harriers until they had left the breeding grounds. All documented predation events occurred during nighttime, the red fox being the main predator, and only one nest was predated by an eagle owl. In 2019, from 54 fenced nests, 17 were predated by the red fox, who had learned to jump over a fence even of an altitude of 1,40 meters. The following pictures are taken at the same nest. On 12th June at 1:23, the chicks are separated by the fence from the fox. At the same night, at 5:59, the nest seems empty, but the fox has returned to the nest site. Here it's still outside the fence. And one night later, all the chicks had been predated the night before. The fox returned to the same nest and has just jumped over the fence. During the following season in 2020, we fixed extension wings to each rectangular element of the fence and thus could successfully prevent predation by foxes. Here you see a camera installed above the nest. Besides information about nest predators, we got some more details from trail cameras. We saw that some males take care of fledglings or even try to incubate when the female has already left the nest after partly predation event. That means that 1 or 2 eggs were left and the male tried to incubate these eggs. And often we saw that males shed eggs or tiny chicks with high temperatures. And we saw that in a nest with 5 chicks, the 2 elder ones, identifiable by the color-coded rings, that they cared for the younger ones and even helped feeding them. Now I come to the last chapter. By tagging birds with GPS GSM loggers, we could follow their movements in detail. With the miniaturization of GPS loggers, we started in 2016 to equip some individuals with 15-gram GPS GSM loggers. These loggers daily transferred up to 80 GPS positions via SMS. The data were stored at MoveBank, an online platform that helps researchers worldwide manage, share, analyze, and achieve animal movement data. We deployed these tags on 10 females and 3 males to study movements within the breeding season. Breeding habitats may be different from feeding habitats that may cover quite large areas. We found that males use large home range areas to provision food to the female and fledglings. Nesting site for all 3 males was within the white circle, but home range areas were quite different in extension and direction, but were nearly identical for the individuals over the years. With a close look to this picture, you may distinguish bright and dark shades of each color. That is the hunting range of the 3 males in 2 consecutive breeding seasons, thus showing site fidelity to the nesting site and home range area. Our latest paper, until now only available as an open access paper, interprets movements of males and females within Spain. Analyzing these data and combining them with field observations, we found social interactions both within the colony and between different colonies. During daytime, mobbing possible predators, including non-breeders, and thus ensuring the colony's welfare. Females helping others in breeding attempts, nest adoption, and we found communal roosting at night. Most females, the flag indicates their breeding sites, visited other colonies 90 to 250 kilometers apart after breeding and before starting migration, with site fidelity over the years. Interestingly, most of them returned to their breeding site before starting migration. Only 1 female, the cyan track on the right picture, explored new areas before migration start. In 2021, we tagged 9 juveniles with 5-gram Icarus tags to study dispersal of the species. In contrast to GSM tags, we receive only 1 to 2 GPS positions per day, enough to follow large distance movements. Additionally, each bird got a national identification aluminium ring and a color-coded ring. Preliminary data show that 2 chicks were predated soon after fledging. 1 bird, Andrea, was identified by the coloring 8 weeks after fledging at a site 320 kilometers away from her birthplace, while we did not get any positions of her tag anymore. That means she had lost the tag but was still alive, but we cannot follow her movements anymore. We found that the tag juveniles stayed near their nest sites, the white circles, 23 to 32 days after fledging, indicating that they still were dependent on food deliveries by the males. After that, they explored different sites in the Iberian Peninsula. We can see that from their birthplace, the white circle, they started in different directions, sometimes returning to places that seemed to be favorite ones. At the end of August and the beginning of September, they started their migration to Africa. We are very keen to see which places they will choose the next year to settle down and possibly start breeding. Coming to the end, I would like to thank many persons. Without their help, fieldwork and studies would not have been possible. And I thank many volunteers for fieldwork during many years. And thank you for your attention. I would be glad to answer your question via email. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senora Brigitte. So if you have questions for her, you can use the chat box and she will answer your question in the chat. So we need to move on with our next presenter. So she's going to talk about the vocal activity of the crested serpent eagles in Peninsular Malaysia. Hello, Amira and Natasha, are you there? Okay. All right.
Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. I will be presenting on the vocal activity of the changeable hawk-eagle, Nisaetus cirrhatus in Peninsular Malaysia. Raptors are charismatic species and often play a critical role in ecological functions, but studies on their behavior are lacking, especially for forest species that reside in habitats that are difficult to access. In Malaysia, most raptor behavior studies in terms of vocalization were done for nocturnal raptors. This can be seen for vocal individuality studies involving Sunda scopes owl, otters lepigi, territorial and duet calls, also on Sunda scopes owl, with addition to brown bubble, Linox scutellata, and spotted wood owl, Strix soloputo, as well as pair duets and acoustic sexing study involving reddish scopes owl, otters rufescens. Vocalization study for hawk-eagle were scarce as well. In the past, a study had carried out for mountain hawk-eagle, Nisaetus nipalensis in Taiwan, where 7 call types were recorded. Calls tend to peak in the morning and gradually decrease until evenings. The average daily call rate was of 8.24 times per day. For the literature on the changeable hawk-eagle, for the distribution, they are common resident in Peninsular Malaysia and Borneo, uncommon in Singapore. By morphology, they occur as two-color morph, that is the dark and pale morph. For habitat, they can be found in deciduous and evergreen forests, peat swamp forests, mangroves, heavily logged forests, and plantations. For this study, the dark morph was often sighted in the study site, especially at the forest edge. On the vocalization, their calls vary from a series of piping whistles with emphasis on the last rising note, a loud two-note call, a single piercing whistle, sometimes followed by 2 to 3 softer notes. Past study had categorized their calls into 4 call categories that are unmodulated whistle, double whistle, glissando whistle with or without cackling, and screaming. This study was conducted with objectives to determine the vocal activity pattern of the changeable hawk-eagle from a forest habitat during breeding season, and to determine the call types uttered by the changeable hawk-eagle from a forest habitat. As for the methods, this study was conducted in an isolated lowland forest reserve, that is the Air Hitam Forest Reserve, Selangor, Malaysia. Due to its high forest value, it was estimated about 70% of the original land area was lost after selective logging in 1936. What's unique about this forest reserve is that even though the forest reserve is isolated, about 160 species of birds can be found in this forest reserve, with 8 diurnal raptors and 5 nocturnal raptors. Field method-wise, automated bioacoustic recorders, Frontier Labs BARFAT, were deployed for 6 days and was set to record for 24 hours. The distance between the recorders are at least 100 meters apart and at least 250 meters away from the forest edge. As for the data collection, the vocalization of the hawk-eagle were passively collected in April 2021, which is during the breeding season. Each recorders were deployed in 5 different sites to collect the calls up to 100-meter radius. To analyze the data, the call types were categorized based on structure of the calls and with reference from the online bird vocalization database, Xenocanto that is. The number and duration of call events were analyzed through Raven Pro software version 1.6. Calls, regardless of different or same call types, uttered less than 30 seconds of silence interval are counted as one call event. The call events were analyzed and sorted by hour. The average daily call rate was analyzed as well. For the difference in daily and hourly call rate, it were analyzed using Kruskal-Wallis hash test. As for the preliminary results, from 720 recording hours, 524 call events were recorded. About 6 call types were identified in this study. Daily call rate was significantly different, with H value of 9.894 and P value of 0.019. The hourly call rate was significantly different, with H value of 49.710 and P value of 0.0. The average daily call rate of the hawk-eagle was of 24.1 times per day. Looking into the vocal activity pattern, the hawk-eagle started to call at dawn, that is at 6 in the morning, and ended at dusk, that is at 7 in the evening. The number of call events peaked at 8 in the morning, then gradually decreased till dusk, with small peaks at 11 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. In average, the call duration was longest at 12 p.m., while the shortest call duration was at 7 p.m. As for the call type, the first call type was a 2-note call. Sometimes only the first note was uttered or the second note uttered twice. This call type can be heard throughout the day. For call type 2, it was a combination of 2 to 8 bouts of the first note and 4 to 6 bouts of the second note. Sometimes it ended with an extra note. For call type 3, it consists of 3 different notes. Sometimes the first 2 note type was only uttered. As for call type 4, it's a 3-note call. For call type 5, it consists of 2 different notes, often uttered shortly before call type 4. As for the last call type 6, it also consists of 2 different notes, but uttered at different call lengths. Moving into discussion on the call types, specific functions of the calls are unknown, but may relate to territorial defense or conspecific communication. Calls may be uttered during courtship, where the pair may be engaging in display flight with both wings and tail tipped upwards. Whistle calls may be used by female as solicitation calls. The screaming call uttered in flight, and when perched may be used as advertising call, that is for territory, and as a pair contact call. It was documented that call type 4 was the most common call uttered by the Changeable Hawk-Eagle. On the vocal activity pattern, the Changeable Hawk-Eagle vocal activity pattern were similar to the mountain hawk-eagle, where the peak calls were at 8 in the morning and gradually decreased until 6 in the evening. The most common behavior displayed by the mountain hawk-eagle was hunting at 10 to 11 in the morning and 1 to 2 in the afternoon. As a conclusion, from the preliminary results, there are 6 call types. The Changeable Hawk-Eagle usually called at dawn, and 5th last heard call at dusk. More calls were uttered in the morning, while longer call duration was uttered in the afternoon. More studies can be carried out to identify specific functions of the calls and comparing the vocal activity pattern in non-breeding season. Lastly, findings made in this study hopes to provide improvement in diurnal raptor survey methods, as well as filling the gap on vocalization of raptors in Malaysia. I would like to acknowledge University Putra Malaysia, UPM, as a funder for this study through IPS Putra Grant. I would like to acknowledge the Department of Wildlife and National Parks, Peninsular Malaysia, DWNP, for granting the research permission, and Sultan Idris Shah Forestry Education Center, SISFAC, for allowing us to access the site. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Puan Chong Leong for the help throughout the study, as well as Al-Kautsar for the help in the field. And thanks everyone for listening. Here are my list of references.
Okay, thank you so much, Amira, Natasha. So if you have a question for Amira, you can use the chat box. So we need to move on with our next presenter. So the next topic will be about ecological niche model reveals the differential space used by the sympatric raptors of Andaman Archipelago, India, and it will be presented by Shalmugal. Unfortunately, he is not available and he's down with COVID. So we will move on to our next presenter, Mr. Ashantana Krishnan Babu. He will talk about the factors influencing the occurrence and abundance of owls in Western Ghats, India. Okay, I pass my baton to you, Mr. Ashantana Krishnan Babu.
My slide is visible now.
I cannot see you. I cannot see your screen also.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's visible now.
Yeah, it didn't visible. Yeah, now it's okay. Yeah, I can see. You can proceed.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Good afternoon, all. Myself, Babu. I'm currently working with Salim Ali Center for Ornithology and Natural History. And this project actually, this talk about influencing the spread and abundance of owls in southern Western Ghats. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you need to start because there's a lagging there.
Yeah. Is it audible now?
Yeah, I can hear you, but the screen I didn't see actually, unfortunately.
Just a minute.
Yeah, take your time.
Is it visible now?
Yeah, it's visible. I can see.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this project was funded by the Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change. Yeah. Before going to my topic, I'll just give a brief introduction about the Western Ghats and its significance, because most of you may not be aware of the Western Ghats. So Western Ghats is located in the southwestern side of the peninsular India, and which is parallel to the west coast, which is almost like 1,600 kilometer length and covering almost 6 states. And yeah, around 160,000 square kilometer area, and it is one of the biodiversity hotspot and hottest hotspot for having a high degree of endemism, especially on lesser vertebrates. Like amphibian, around 78% of amphibians reported from the Western Ghats are endemics to Western Ghats, and similarly the reptiles, around 62% of the reptiles are endemic to Western Ghats. And out of around India's total biodiversity, around 30% of biodiversity is reported from the Western Ghats, although it occupies only 6% of India's land mass. So that shows the significance in terms of biodiversity of this Western Ghats. And this is because there is a high level of topographic and climatic heterogeneity in the Western Ghats, because the elevation ranges from even 0 meter in the Goa or Maharashtra part, coastal areas, even it comes to close to coast, and then it goes up to even 2,700 meter elevation. So there is a wide elevation range and different climatic patterns, like different rainfall patterns, that makes a different kind of vegetation types and distinct fauna and flora. Okay, so although it is having a high rich diversity of vertebrates and flora and fauna, this also undergoes a tremendous pressure because of this poverty and population pressure. And there is an estimate available annual deforestation rate in the Western Ghats, which says around 0.28% to 0.7% per year, and which is again related, and it varies with population density and other socio-economic factors. Among the threats, the one threat that affects most to the cavity-associated vertebrates is the logging. And since owls are also secondary cavity-associated vertebrates, and they are the more susceptible to the logging. And Western Ghats supports around 16 species of owls out of 36 species reported from India, and including 2 migratory and 1 endemic owl to the Western Ghats. And 3 mature forest specialists like a brown wood owl, forest eagle owl, and Ripley's bay owl are also found in the Western Ghats. So far, although it has a diverse owl species, there is no proper study was undertaken to assess the population status or the current situation of these owls in the Western Ghats. So with that, we initiated this study with a focus to cover only the southern part of the Western Ghats, that is between the Netravati Valley and Mahendragiri Peak. And the elevation ranges from 100 meter to 2,700 meter elevation. And it receives a two rainfall pattern. One is southwest monsoon, that is between June and August, and the northeast monsoon during the October. Southwest monsoon, it blows from the Arabian Sea, and the other one is from the Bay of Bengal. So the interesting is the Western Ghats receives maximum rainfall during the southwest monsoon, that is that wind blows from the Arabian Sea. The crust around along the Western Ghats, which stops the clouds, and maximum rainfall is happening in the western side of the Western Ghats than the eastern sides. That leads to the formation of dry forest and leads to a rain shadow area. And whereas in the case of the western side, it is full of rainfed area, so it is a moist to wet forest. So so that makes a unique and important set of habitat diversity, from low dry forest to mountain evergreen forest. Other than the natural forest, there are several agroforestry, monoculture, plantation, and economic crops within the Western Ghats system. Okay, so we conducted study only in the southern Western Ghats, that too in Kerala and Tamil Nadu part, because part of the Karnataka we couldn't cover. And we have done around 276 point counts across 24 forest areas. These are all the forest areas that we have covered. And 11 wildlife sanctuaries, 2 national parks, 5 tiger reserve, and 6 reserve forests. The major land use types within each forest divisions was covered during the survey, and we kept at least a 2-kilometer interval between the points. Since it is a nocturnal survey, and yeah, we have to manage the elephants, because most of these parts of Western Ghats are infested with elephants, and yeah, that that's why we have restricted most of our studies along the trails and already existing paths. And for survey protocol, we used 3 techniques to record the presences of owls. One is initial quiet listening and call playback method and spotlight searches. For call playback method, we have recorded all the calls of owls from the Western Ghats, and we played in a sequence for the lesser owls first, and then subsequently to the larger owls. And then followed by spotlight searches in the immediate vicinity for non-responsive owls. And we have taken 4 environmental variables for all the sites. One is altitude, that we categorized into low, medium, and high elevations based on the elevational category of evergreen types, like 0 to 700 meter, 750 meter is the low elevation, and medium 750 to 1500, and above 1500 is the high elevation. And vegetation type, we broadly classify into 6 types. And similarly, the slope also we categorized into 4 types. And disturbance level we quantified like in such a way that the distance to the nearest human habitation, because this is a surrogate of disturbance. So we classified that into 3 categories. And for analysis, mean abundance we estimated from number of individuals counted to the total number of points covered in a particular stratum. And then we applied chi-square test to find out the difference in the species richness and abundance. And we also tried a non-metric multidimensional scaling to assess the pattern of species composition across the surveyed locations. So we recorded almost 618 owls of 13 species. Out of 16 species, we could record only 13 species. And 3 of the species we could not record, that is dusky eagle owl, and this long-eared owl, and eastern grass owl. And with a mean abundance of around 2.48 owls per point, we recorded almost all the lesser owls, like jungle owlet, Indian scops owl, brown hawk owl, and Oriental scops owl in all the habitat. And only one this brown fish owl we have recorded in, although it is a larger owl, but we have recorded in all the habitat. In the case of the restricted species, barn owl and spotted owlet is like agriculture dependent species, and very rarely we have recorded in the Western Ghats, that too in the fringes of these forests. Whereas in the case of rocky eagle and mottled owl, mostly recorded from the low altitude dry forest, where they use hillocks and dry grass areas for nesting and also for foraging. And among the habitat, scrub and dry deciduous forest shared maximum number of species. So when we plotted sanctuary-wise the species composition, then we got a east to west pattern. That is from the rain shadow area and rainfed area to rain shadow area. There is a clear-cut pattern we have observed. These are all areas comes under the like a KMTR, PRF, and CWS, TRP, and ARF, and these areas comes under the Tamil Nadu part, that is the eastern part of the Western Ghats, whereas in this case the remaining areas comes under the western side of the Western Ghats. So it shows a different kind of species composition with respect to all species of owls and also for lesser owls. And there is no pattern of latitude we haven't observed. We observed only the longitudinal pattern, that is rainfed to rainfed area. And that same trend was even observed in the lesser owls. Whereas in the case of larger owls, there is no such a clear-cut pattern was obtained. So we plotted the abundance of owls for four species. First one is jungle owlet. The abundance of jungle owlet is much higher in the western side of the Western Ghats than the eastern side. And similar case for a brown hawk-owl, that is also more abundant in the western side than the eastern side of the Western Ghats. Whereas in the case of scops owl, there is not much difference between the dry and the eastern wet slopes of the Western Ghats for both the scops owl, like Indian scops owl or Oriental scops owl. And then we plotted the mean abundance and richness of owls in different vegetation types. So we brought them into two broad category, lesser and larger owls, based on the body size. And the maximum number abundance of owls, lesser owls, were reported from the moist deciduous forest, whereas in the case of larger owl, it was a scrub forest. And that is the same trend for even a mean species richness per point. And in the case of altitude, larger owls prefers a low elevation, whereas the lesser owls prefer a medium elevation. In the case of anthropogenic disturbance, both the species are found in good number close to the human habitation. So if you look at the number, it is almost similar to the even low anthropogenic disturbance, because it follows a different species composition. When it comes to close to the human habitation, there are some species like a barn owl or a spotted owlet, and those species occupies. Whereas in, even jungle owlet occupies those patches, even Oriental scops owl. So that's why even in the high area, we are getting a more species richness and abundance. And then we compared our observations with our own study in Meghalaya and Andaman. And it is very almost similar. The mean abundance is almost similar between Meghalaya and the Western Ghats. It's almost equal. Whereas in the case of Andaman Islands, Andaman Nicobar Islands, it was around 2.04 owls per point, which is very less. This may be due to the lack of poor species richness. Only 5 species of owls are reported. Out of them, 4 are endemics to the Andaman Island. And the habitat heterogeneity also is very poor. Only 3 or 4 habitats only available there, except some combinations, right? And when we compared the overall abundance of individual species, if you look at the Oriental scops owl between Andaman and the Western Ghats, the Oriental scops owl abundance is very high in Andaman Island compared to the Western Ghats. When you look at the brown hawk-owl, brown hawk-owl in the Western Meghalaya, it is around 0.14. Whereas in the case of the similar species like Hume's hawk-owl, it was earlier treated as a subspecies of a brown hawk-owl. It was around 0.73. Whereas in the case of Western Ghats, it's only 0.6. The abundance-wise, the island area is having a high abundance of owls. So from this, we conclude that dry deciduous, low altitude, and highly disturbed sites have a high species richness of owls, and moist deciduous forests and mid elevation and highly disturbed sites have a high abundance of owls. And we found an east to west gradient in species composition of owls. With respect to conservation, lesser owls are not facing any immediate threat to their survival because they are in good abundance. Whereas in the case of larger owls, and especially the species associated with a riparian habitat, like a mature forest specialist, like a brown wood owl or a forest eagle owl or a Oriental bay owl, and the dry forest associated species like motile wood owl or in the Indian eagle owl, they are facing a lot of problems even in their potential habitats, like mining. Mining is one of the major issue in the dry elevations, and fire and cattle grazing, and a lot of superstitious beliefs put these species under a heavy stress, because all these 6 states, they have their own it's a diverse linguistic and also social and cultural beliefs, and that put a lot of pressures on these owls. So from this study, what we suggested is to keep hillocks and dry forest outside the protected areas that needs conservation attention from the managers. And we acknowledge MOFCC for funding this project, and directors of our institutions, and Tamil Nadu and Kerala Forest Department for the permission, and all our field assistants who helped us from the elephants and other large herbivores, and ARRCN for providing this opportunity to make the presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Santana Krishnan Babu.
My name is Babu.
Okay. Babu. Okay. Sorry. So Babu.
That is my father name. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So it's a very interesting presentation, Mr. Babu. If audiences, if you have a question for him, you can use the chat box, and Mr. Babu, you can answer them in the chat.
Yeah. Sure.
Right.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay, now we move on with our final presentation. Actually, this is the recorded one. The very short presentation, actually, from Thanawat Punyasiri. Okay, he's from Thailand, so he's going to talk about the nest observation of black-thighed falconet in Phetchaburi province, Western Thailand.
Hello everyone, my name is Thanawat Punyasiri. Today I'm going to present about nest observation of black-thighed falconet in Phetchaburi province, Thailand. First of all, black-thighed falconet or Microhyrax fringillarius is the smallest diurnal raptor in the world. Its habitat is mainly in the forest with large trees, and its range includes Western Thailand, Peninsular Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and Brunei Darussalam, but the breeding data of the species is still little known. The observation was made with binoculars and telescopes. We observed for 3 days between 1st and 3rd June in 2009. The photograph and the videos were taken by a digital camera with telephoto lens. The nest was built inside a leaf chinaberry or Mileacidarax trunk hollow. The tree is located on the roadside in Kangajan National Park in Phetchaburi Province, Western Thailand. The hole was oval-shaped, around 4 to 5 centimeters wide, and the tree is 7 meters high above the ground. There were 17 feeding attempts while we were observing the nest, and most of the prey were butterflies. But there were also 2 small birds, and after they hatched, the male passed the defeated bodies to the alpha female and made them into the small pieces and fed it to the chicks in the nest. 3 adults were seen in front of the nest. We presume that is the juveniles of the previous brood. As black-thighed falconet is likely to have a cooperative breeding behavior, as in collared falconet. In 2017, 8 birds were observed flying into their nest hole between 5 to 6 p.m. for the night roost. At summary, the habitat of black-thighed falconet is the forest edges or clearings with large trees, from lowlands to lower mountains elevations at 1,500 meters, and it nests in the old barbet or woodpecker tree holes due to lack of ability to wood chiseling or penetrate. And Malaysian researchers also found that they use limestone cracks as their nests too. Main prey of black-tailed falconet is invertebrates, but however, small birds and bats are also one of their prey. We are grateful to Raptor Research Fund for Conservation, Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, Kasesa University for providing resources for this study. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the last presentations from Mr. Tanawat Punya Siri. I'm not sure whether he is here. So, okay, yeah. Now, so it's still 5:48. So we have a lot of time. I think about 10 minutes to go before we end our session. We're supposed to finish by 6:10. So if you have any question from any presenter for today, you can ask now. You can use the microphone to ask from them. So that's now it's your time now to ask. Okay. No more questions? Okay, if you don't have any question, you can join to room number 2. There's still have many more presentations from other presenters. So that's it from me today. I'm really glad to meet with you all and learn a lot of things from you all, even though my background is more on the genetics, but yeah, I totally enjoy and get a lot of knowledge, new knowledge actually, from something to do with the ecology and the behavior of raptors in Malaysia, in Spain, in Thailand, as well as in Taiwan, also in Thailand, and also from India. Thank you so much. See you in the next section. That will be in the morning, tomorrow morning. Yeah.